Hello, it's me, Mark Anderson, and in this session I'm going to be discussing aspects of international strategy. There are three key areas I'm going to discuss. First of all, aspects of the general environment that create a positive environment for the operation of businesses across different international regions. I'm going to consider ways in which firms might go about selecting target markets for them to enter. And then finally, I'll look at the options which firms have for initial entry to the market that they might have selected. Looking first of all then at the general environment that creates a positive benefit for firms to work internationally. George Yip identified 4 key areas which influence the success of internationalization of markets. These 4 areas you can see here: global market convergence, cost advantages, global competition, and government influence. The first one, global market convergence, is a concept we're probably all familiar with. And that concept is that the more we travel and the further we travel, the more we see goods and services, shops and so forth that are familiar to us from back home. The idea is that the world is becoming a smaller place, and there are growing groups of customers around the world with similar needs, and these have the potential to become global customers for firms. And what's of great advantage to firms that are seeking to make these customers their customers is the fact that they are susceptible to the same marketing techniques, the same marketing messages as their domestic customers. So it makes it relatively easy or relatively inexpensive to access these customers, to communicate with them. So we've got a growing number of customers which we can sell to around the world. And this ties in with some of the concepts around the cost advantages of operating internationally. If we have more customers and we can produce more products, then we can create scale economies, and our products can become cheaper, so we can sell them to more people at lower prices, or perhaps create more profit. So as we can increase our market share around the world, then we become bigger and more profitable, which enables us to carry on opening up new markets. This is a particular relevance to firms, for example pharmaceutical firms, who have very high product development costs, and they need to access lots and lots of different markets in order to reach break-even sales, to get a fair return on the investment they put into developing their drugs. From a different perspective, maybe not developing customers, but increasing the capability of the firm, then by placing manufacturing facilities or distribution facilities or service centers around the world, then firms often have the opportunity to reduce their costs and become more competitive in their home markets. So one form of internationalization is seeking areas to source raw materials or components, or to set up manufacturing sites, and therefore become more efficient, more effective by reducing their costs. Global competition is becoming an increasing factor for most firms. And where you have been operating for many, many years in your own domestic market, and then you start to see that your competitors are increasingly larger than you, and they're increasingly spread around the world, and by being spread around the world and being bigger, they're getting cost advantages and reputational advantages, then firms start to see that in order to continue competing with global competitors, then it's no longer possible to remain a domestic competitor, and that all firms have to start moving towards some form of international development. We also see a fair amount of independence between some firms and their suppliers. So if you consider car manufacturers rove around the world setting up manufacturing plants in areas where they can access new markets, and also they can manufacture efficiently on a very cost-effective basis. If you're a supplier to one of these car manufacturers, then to maintain your contracts, then you need to be able to follow your customers around the world and supply them wherever they set up. So there can be a level of interdependence that arises, because to keep your existing customers, you have to mimic their international growth. The final aspect then to consider is government influence, and the extent to which principally governments either protect their home markets or they promote international trade. What trade policies do they enter into? What trade agreements do they enter into with other countries around the world? How are the technical standards, perhaps for acceptable technical standards for products, set and agreed with other governments so that the markets are more open? We can see, in particular at the moment, with the uncertainties over the Trump administration, with the uncertainties around Brexit, the extent to which governments can influence the level of international business. So let's look at the one of the key questions, briefly look at one of the key questions around the aspirations of firms when they are looking to develop internationally. There is a real dilemma that exists in terms of the purpose of international operations. Yes, we want to grow, but what is the competitive advantage that's being sought? Is it a move towards adapting to local needs and requirements, or is it more of an idea following that original concept of let's produce more of the same product, get our costs down, and then compete on price around the world? So the question is, to what extent do we want to act like a local company, adapting to local needs, compared to the other stance that might be taken of being seen as a large global company that's producing standard products for everybody around the world? The original concept of globalization, as it was originally referred to, developed by people such as Theodore Levitt, was based on the premise that we increase our manufacturing volumes, we decrease our costs. But if we're increasing our volumes, then we want to be making the same product. So the intention of a global company is to provide the same product manufactured at the lowest possible cost, and supply that product anywhere in the world, the same product. The difficulties of this were emphasized by people like Douglas and Wind, and they came up with a counter-argument that suggested that whilst you could grow much larger globally by selling the same product, it's difficult to penetrate and gain control of local markets when faced with local competition who are tailoring their products specifically for local consumption. So the big question when entering the international arena is, to what extent will the firm adapt to local requirements, local demands, local tastes, but that adaptation increases costs? Or to what extent will the firm standardize their product everywhere in the world with the benefit of reducing cost, but with the difficulty of competing against strong local competitors? So, to get away from that more difficult concept, let's look at some of the factors that might be considered when looking for potential international markets to develop. What characteristics might a firm be looking for? At a macro level, then a firm will be looking for an area which has got a stable political environment. One preferably, of course, that is open to international trade, so it promotes international trade. It has open markets and easy access, and that political environment is hopefully steady, stable for some long time. In economic terms, then you'll be looking for a region which has got a growing economy measured by an increasing gross domestic product, which is enabling the firms or the individuals in those markets to increase their disposable income and to be able to afford more products and hopefully afford more expensive products. And also an area which has got a low currency risk. A firm doesn't want to devote a lot of time, effort and resource to developing a market only to find that it loses all its profits because of adverse exchange rates when the money is repatriated to the home country. There also needs to be some compatibility with the demographics, the social demographics, the levels of education, the skills that exist in particular target areas. Are your products or services acceptable to these people? Or, of course, if you are looking to set up manufacturing or some sort of service facility, is the level of education and skill appropriate for the services that you want them to be able to supply for your customers elsewhere? Also, in line with the political stability, a firm will probably be looking for an area in which it can operate safely with strongly upheld legal structures, particularly perhaps maybe in areas of protecting things like brands and trademarks and patents. At an operational level, a similar suite of characteristics will also be sought, and these have been put together as the CAGE framework, and it's all based on an assessment of similarity or difference between the home country and the target country. So in terms of cultural distance, a lot of the elements of culture, language, religion, ethnicity, how similar are they to the home country? So are they compatible? Similarly, looking at the style and nature of administration and the political system, is it compatible and supportive for the incoming firm? It shouldn't be overlooked how difficult or easy is it to get products and people to the target market. If it becomes too expensive and too timely, then many of the advantages will probably be lost. So understanding how easy it is to get to and travel to and around the target market becomes an important consideration. Similarly, can the people or the firms within that target market actually afford the products or services that you want to offer them? So a number of different regions or specific countries might be considered using these two different frameworks. And then finally, it will be whittled down to 2 or 3 priority targets. And the consideration then becomes, how are we going to make our first entry into this new target market? The first step, often in terms of becoming an international company, is to set up a simple export operation so that your products are made perhaps in the UK and you make contact, perhaps increasingly these days over the internet or maybe through a traditional trade fair. You make contact with potential buyers, you set up the negotiations, you agree prices and specifications, and then the product, if it's possible, is simply transported from the home country to this new target market. That may be a completely direct operation, or you may have established some local sales agents to help you negotiate and identify specific customers in the target market. This level of involvement has the advantage that it's relatively cheap. There's a low level of commitment from the the firm in terms of resources, particularly people, the time involved. But also there's a fairly low return in terms of the profit that can be realized. If you want to step up the scale of the venture, then a firm might look for some form of joint venture. Maybe the product will be licensed to be sold by agents in the area, or maybe manufacturing agreements will be set up with local manufacturers, or maybe some form of joint ownership company will be established with partners in the target market who can offer you access to that market through their knowledge of the specific customers and the way of doing business in that area. So this increases the commitment from the firm in terms of people, finance and time to this new international venture. The third level of international development is often referred to as foreign direct investment. It's the big hit where finally the company decides they will set up their own manufacturing facilities or their own distribution facilities, or maybe they will start setting up their whole new company in that area, perhaps by acquiring a local company or perhaps by starting from scratch. But what the direct investment involves is a far higher, perhaps 100% ownership of the operation, which takes more finance, more risk, more commitment, but the potential of achieving a higher return. So we can see that as a firm might escalate through these various stages, then the level of commitment increases, the level of risk increases, but so too does the level of control of the operation, which can be to the benefit of the firm, and obviously also the profit is shared with fewer and fewer people, and so there's a greater potential for making more money from the operation. So a firm has to decide, in light of its specific experience, its knowledge, its skills, competencies, what level it's going to commit to entering the new international market. How much help does it need, perhaps from partners, in order to overcome some of the risks or difficulties? And these sorts of options are very similar to the options we've already discussed before of the methods by which a particular strategic direction is pursued. Now, whilst there are lots of complex academic discussions around the nature of international business, the organization of firms internationally, how to select markets and all the rest of it, and what actually is the benefit or dangers of globalization. In terms of growth of international business, then it is this simple metal container that has led the way, that has enabled the level of international business that now exists. Without this standardized shipping box, which has decreased the costs dramatically and increased the security of international shipments, then we wouldn't be able to reach the level of international business that currently exists. So sometimes in life, it's the practical elements that are just as important as understanding lots and lots of theory.